Good afternoon, dear colleagues, ladies and gentlemen. Let me welcome you all to this policy panel. My name is László Andor. I'm the Secretary General of FEPS, Foundation for European Progressive Studies, but I'm also a visiting professor at this institute, and it's always a pleasure to come back. Let me highlight in introduction that the panel takes place in the context of the interdisciplinary conference on European advanced studies, which is actually a product of a coalition of several institutions. It's a three-day scientific event organized by, first of all, ULB, Institute of European Studies, but in collaboration with the European Studies Institute of the VUB, which is a sister institution, is it not? And the International Studies Department at the University of Warwick in the United Kingdom. The academic conference this year focuses on inequality and the European Union with the subtitle New Frontiers in European Studies. And we thought that the question of housing would be an excellent topic. Why exactly? Because this is not very often talked about as a European competence. Nevertheless, if you look at what's really emerging as a burning problem for many families across Europe, and what might be on the mind of people who are really concerned about the cost of living crisis. Which is not entirely new. It has been already evolving in the recent years, but probably not going away by itself. So we have a complex problem, and indeed, if we can foster a dialogue among academics and policymakers on this topic, I think there would be a great added value of the discussion. At this point, it is my great pleasure to introduce the speakers of this afternoon. We will start with Michaela Kauer, who is the director at the Brussels office of the city of Vienna. Vienna, as you know, is a kind of mecca of social housing with incredible tradition. In this real century-long tradition, we can say. And Michaela is indeed a renowned expert on urban policy, affordable housing and public services, and on the top of that, with also a strong gender equity focus in this field. She's going to be followed by Sorcha Edwards, who is General Secretary of Housing of Europe, the European Federation of Public, Cooperative and Social Housing since 2014. But she also has an academic career which led her to this position through Dublin City University and also the University of Salamanca and University of Ulster and also University of Leuven. In other words, a long list of universities, which is always a great experience and something which the European Union allowed us to happen. Ana Carla Pereira is going to be the third speaker. Very welcome. Ana Carla is an expert in the cabinet of Commissioner Nicolas Schmit, who is a commissioner, as you know, for jobs and social rights. Ana Carla has been in a variety of positions in the European Commission. Her work currently primarily addresses initiatives related to the European Pillar of Social Rights, with a particular emphasis on housing policies and homelessness. So the format of the discussion will be that I will ask the three speakers to address a common question. We will make 3 rounds before opening up to Q&A, and my colleague David Rinaldi from FEPS will arrive in the meantime and he's going to complete the interactive part at the very end. So without further ado, I would like to ask Michaela to start the presentation, which in the first round should be a kind of stock taking to see where we are with housing situation, but also housing policy in Europe, what you consider to be, let's say, the most burning issues, knowing that the current crisis is probably not the same type as the crisis 10 years before, which was in the aftermath of the financial crisis, which was a consequence of the speculative investment bubbles in a variety of countries, including Spain and Ireland, and at the same time now in a post-COVID situation, and at the time of very intense economic warfare, obviously there might be different factors behind the burning problems of housing.
Yep.
So the floor is yours.
Yeah, thanks a lot, and thanks a lot for the invitation. I'm really pleased to be here today. I'm a visiting lecturer at University of Applied Studies in Austria, in Eisenstadt as well, since 10 years. So I always love to go to universities and discuss with students, and I hope the interactive part will not last that long, but we can start right away. Maybe if you have any questions, I'm used to discuss. I love that. So yeah, it was said by Laszlo, friendly introduction, Vienna, the mecca of social and affordable housing. Just to give you a few key numbers to be really impressed. We have now 2 million people living in Vienna since October. In October last year, we hit the 2 million mark, which was like very exciting for us because we now are the 5th biggest cities in the European Union. And that's really exciting. It means that we have a lot of people coming. We are a city that is growing in numbers, in young people, in families, but it's also aging. So there's a lot of demographic change going on in our cities, but we can rely on a very, very well-developed system of social and affordable housing, which is basically that we have 220,000 municipal flats in Vienna owned by the city, where a quarter of the population lives, 500,000 people. On that, we add the cooperative sector, and I mean, Sorka is going to talk more about that also. So we have, no, the attention is again here. So we have 200,000 cooperative flats. Again, another 400,000 people live in those flats. And in total, we have 77% of the people renting in Vienna, but under very protected conditions, because we have still a strong rental law, which includes, as a default option, unlimited rental contracts, regulated rents, and a lot of tenants protection. And that is something that is like a little bit the magic. But the like I say, the recipe behind is that Vienna, since more than 100 years, when this was all started in 1919, after World War I, when the Socialist Party at that time, Socialist Party, now Social Democratic Party, obviously entered into power, they immediately started, in fact, it was not a housing program, it was a society program. It was a program to make society good for everyone and the city livable for everybody. And what they did at that time is they built, between the 2 world wars, 60,000 flats, and they did it all over the city. So there is no such thing like pockets of poverty or territorial and social segregation. They really put all of these municipal housing complexes across the city, even in the more posh areas and rich areas, etc. So that's really the big commitment was to reach social mix, yeah, both in the flats but also in across the city. So we use, of course, a lot of instruments, and we can go into detail on that. But it's basically controlling what's going on in your city, and that means intervention in the market, because the market, and this is the reason why we are here today, the market does not deliver what people need. I mean, we all know that. I mean, classical economic theory. There is a demand, and the market will offer the solution, right? So there's a demand for affordable housing. So where is the solution delivered by the market? It's not there. It is there where you have a big sector of social, cooperative, and public housing, which is in Austria. We are really lucky 25% of the Austrian population do live in the cooperative housing sector. 25, a quarter of the population. And in Vienna, it's even more. It's close to half of the population. Yeah? That means what we also know, I mean, we are always trying to do this a little bit more evidence-based. What we found out is the big share of protected housing, in whatever it means. It can be public property, it can be cooperative property, means that we have a price dampening effect on the overall market. So that is this evidence. We shared that study recently. So that's something that is really important to know. So what happens? What happens when you do not intervene in a market that doesn't work is what we have today, in Europe and in many places across the globe. There's a lack in investment, which means a lack in production, which is there is little affordable housing stock out there. At the same time, we have people moving to cities. We are living in the millennium of cities, which means that, in fact, the pressure is growing. What we also have, and that's, of course, new, the global financial crash in 2008, 2009, of course, hit also the public budgets. And it led to a situation, London School of Economics, and you did this study together with Gerhard Kössel, really said you could see that the shift of budgets from investment in infrastructure to social aid. So again, this was hitting the cities and making it impossible, and the public sector, to invest in affordable housing solutions. So there's a lot of things going on. Now, on top of that, we have, of course, a lot of global developments, where I think the EU has a role to play. This is a lecture and a seminar on European studies. So what is going on global scale? The global investors, investment funds, are really looking for where can they make the best profit, and housing seems to be something where we don't talk about housing as a human right, but housing as an asset. And that means that, again, we have a lot of money, interest, profit-oriented interest in the sector, which is not helping people who are looking for a flat, like you described. Now, we have 3 in 4 European people today are afraid of rising housing costs. They think they cannot do it any longer. It will be very Eurofound numbers. So, and we have, I think it's about a fifth or a fourth of the young adults in Europe who still live with their parents. Yeah. So these are all numbers. People postpone their family planning, their career planning, because, I mean, and not talking, I mean, you are quite young still, but this leads to a situation where you are re-infantilized. It's the question of mental health comes in at that place. And we have, of course, we were so friendly to mention that I'm an urban feminist by definition and by conviction, of course. If you look at housing affordability from a gender perspective, and you know that in Europe we have 16% gender pay gap and close to 40% gender pension gap between men and women. Yeah, of course there is a gender dimension in all of that. So we need to, whatever we do on European level, we have to also address these topics. So I've been too long already.
No, but you just mentioned what we do at the European level, which will be the second question.
Okay, sorry.
So I think we could, before going that, why don't we continue the stock taking with the other 2 speakers, starting with Zorka, and then we zoom on the European issue later. Yeah,
but I'm sorry, I always need a little bit more time to explain the Vienna model, you know. That's true. No, it's okay. I'm fine. Okay.
Thanks a lot for the invite. It's good to be at one of the only universities I haven't attended yet in Europe. No, my first sentence will be sort of related to the EU, but just as an introduction to the stock take, and it's just to say, to make it relevant and a bit of understanding of the context we work in. So just this morning we had a meeting with Red Cross, who have conducted a project linked to the Safe Home Initiative, so people coming to Europe because of the war in Ukraine, and they analysed 9 countries, and one of the big problems they came up against was that after people were in temporary accommodation, so housed by private households, unfortunately there was nowhere for them to go. Mm-hmm. And generally also in their work in the Red Cross managing shelters, even when people now get status, so they're status holders in the EU, unfortunately they're staying in the shelters because, again, this issue where there is actually nowhere to pass on, there's no even temporary or permanent accommodation affordable to actually move on to. So I think this and Red Cross approaching us, asking us, okay, can we work together? And they said, okay, sorry, we don't want to, step on your toes. We don't want to, take over your role at EU level. But this is what we're now impacting our work. And similarly, I think we've also been approached by the ESPD, so working on people with disabilities, the same issue. So and aging. So 80% of our homes are actually in the EU are not fit for people with a disability. They're not fit for aging, so people to age with dignity at home. So again, we have this, this overlap of the mission. Again, another story is the energy efficiency. So we have all of those working on the environmental objectives coming to our doors, because they see that actually it's only broadly speaking, it's only really the limited profit sector who are actually have an interest in having energy efficient homes in the long term, and not just extract a short-term profit as much of the direction a lot of the sector has gone in. So again, if we want to reach our environmental goals, unfortunately we're also up against the way the housing sector has moved. So Michaela mentioned young people not being able to start their own way in society. So we, in the last Eurostat figures, we say 9.6 million Europeans between 25 and 34 are working and still living at home. So again, it's another issue. So if we look at very many of the goals, and they're not only EU goals, of course, they're the Paris climate objectives, they're existential goals if we talk about climate, but any of our national goals, housing is unfortunately getting in the way. So the fact that we've sort of messed up in most places, with the exceptions, Vienna being one of them, we've gone the wrong way in many cases, not only in Europe but globally, on housing, and it's starting to really interfere not only with own personal goals, our own identity, our own life plans, but also societal goals. And I think we're supposedly going to enter an era where most of the politicians will be talking not about inclusion but about competitiveness, never mind defence. Even when we think about competitiveness, we're hearing, teachers not being able to live near their schools, and also just employers not being able to actually have the skilled workforce that they need because of the price of accommodation. So this, I think, gives an indication of the state of play. And if I give also a few figures, so if we look, these are some figures our chair presented to the housing ministers meeting in Liège just not so many weeks ago, so the start of March, with regards to the state of play in terms of investment into the sector. So we can compare 19 billion spent on capital investment, so actually the provision of housing, so building and supplying housing, compared to 44 billion, which are top-ups. So top-ups are indeed subsidising private rental sector or paying for short-term accommodation or hotels. So it's also in terms of just good management of public budgets, let's say. It's starting, and not to say that subsidies are not needed as well. So this is a part of any good housing system is also to pay support subsidies, but now we see that the balance is a little bit out of balance, let's say. And then if we look at just what's happening on the market, so these figures you're all familiar with, I'm sure, also because it's a challenge for all of us to find affordable accommodation. But we see that residential property prices 50% higher in EU Q3 23 compared to 2010, and then on average rents up 23% in the same period. And of course, and that's a bit of the issue with our figures that we have at EU level, they cover a multitude of diverse situations, because very often we don't see there the places where actually rents have potentially doubled, so even 100%, but we also don't see the reality of shrinking areas. So 50% of urban areas in France, for instance, are actually shrinking. So it's often a topic that's not spoken about because we don't have the high demand for housing there, we don't have services, jobs, but it is part of the European reality as well when it comes to housing. Not to overlook also mortgage. So we see 2.6 increase in percentage points in the Eurozone between 21 and 2023. And that could be an extra almost €4,000 annual repayment. So it's also in the home ownership sector that I think only those who own their homes outright are actually in a privileged position, but those accessing mortgages are potentially, because of the interest rates, are also penalised at the moment. And finishing up, I think, on the stock taking, and I think this is important for, as Laszlo mentioned, this is in the run-up to the elections. What we have seen is that 46% of people living in the private rental sector feel at risk of losing their home, and that was in 2023 for economic reasons. So again, I think this is where I think it becomes a concern for all of us, because this instability at the individual level is obviously translated into, and of course it's not only housing as mentioned, it's the cost of living crisis. We're looking at groceries gone up 21% in Belgium last year. So it's a combination of the housing plus the increase in the cost of living prices, but resulting this feeling of insecurity, which of course translates into sort of instability on a personal but also a societal level, as it's starting to define who we are as individuals, but also define how our cities are. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I would leave it there as the stock take. Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Would you like to complete the line from Brussels perspective?
Yes, good afternoon everyone. As Laszlo mentioned, I worked with Commissioner Schmidt, who is the Commissioner for Employment and Social Rights, and because there was a reference to elections, I feel I need to put a disclaimer here, because Commissioner Schmidt is also Spitzenkandidatin for the political group of the Socialists and Democrats, but I'm not here in condition of supporting the Spitzenkandidat. I'm here in the condition of supporting him as a commissioner, and I want to make clear, because we are obliged to make that difference. So, and there have been already a lot of numbers, important information been mentioned, but maybe I will mention a few of the drivers that lead to this housing cost crisis that you have mentioned, and that maybe is different from what has happened after the financial crisis. And the first one is obviously the increase of the energy prices, and what that meant in terms of both on supply and demand. On the supply of housing, it meant that materials for construction have increased, and because permitting of building new housing was never recovered from the financial crisis, there was less investment in the market. But on the side of the demand, obviously the increase of prices meant that people have less purchasing power. And of course, it meant that the burden of housing in their overall income has increased dramatically, either through mortgages or through rents. And Sorcha already mentioned a few numbers. This, of course, this difficulty is felt differently according to if you live in a city or if you live in a rural area, for example. But overall, it's a phenomenon that has been spread around Europe across all member states. So this is not something that we can say is specific to Lisbon or Dublin or Rome. It is across the board, with a few exceptions, havens of affordable housing. So that is an important aspect, and the way we monitor this issue is through one indicator, and we might want to discuss about instruments for the future, is how we monitor all these things. Basically, we only have one indicator that we use at European level for policy making, which might raise the questions, what can we do about it, which is the overburden of housing costs. And normally we take the 40% of income as a threshold. If you go to a bank, the normal thing they will do if you want to ask for a mortgage is, would the mortgage be below 40% of your income? So that is the kind of thing we use. Is this the right measure? Probably there would be better indicators, but for the moment, this is the one that is generally accepted. And what we see is that 10% of the population, generally speaking, there's a big differences between the countries, but generally speaking, 10% of the population is spending more than 40%. Of course, if your income is lower, you can imagine that 40% weights a lot. If you have a very high income, 40% maybe is not an issue. But if you have 1,000 euros a month or 10,000 euros a month, it makes a big difference, this 40%. And so when you look at people in low income groups, this phenomenon is exacerbated, and you have many more people, more than 20%, so 1 out of 5, that spend more than 40% of their income either in mortgages or in rents. And so what has happened after the increase of the energy prices and inflation is that the issue of housing became spread to parts of the population that previously were sort of saved from the issue, and we cannot speak any longer just about an issue of the low income class, but a problem of the middle class, because you have people having a full-time job, having an average salary, and not being able to cover their housing costs. So that is a very important driver, what has happened recently, and this is why this issue has become politically so relevant and much more prominent in the political debate. The second relates to all the efforts we need to make around renovation, because as you are aware, we all committed to the targets on the Green Deal to decrease our emissions, our gas emissions by 50%, and the building sector is an important producer of emissions. So there is an enormous effort globally that we have to do to renovate houses. But of course, if you're already in strain to pay your mortgage or your rent, how are you going to renovate? So this is a big question, and the studies show that we would need 275 billion a year to be able to renovate, which is a massive investment that would be required. And this is how we save energy also.
Even more.
Of course, we are talking about isolating the houses, putting a solar panel, but there are families in Europe that are not even able to keep their home warm, as we call it. This is another indicator that we use. And of course, if they're not capable of renovating and isolating, of course they will spend more of their income on energy. The other driver that is really important and was already mentioned is the phenomena of short-term rentals. This is a phenomenon that affects primarily the urban areas, but has, in a way, crowded out the long-term rentals in places, particularly in places where there is a lot of tourism. So what has happened is that owners of flats and houses understood that having a short-term rental through Airbnb and others of the sort would be more profitable than having a permanent family or person staying in their house. And this meant that the people who are living in the cities are pushed away from the center because they need to find houses to stay permanently. But it also means that their life has become far more complicated because normally jobs are in the center of the cities. And so this means that you increase your cost of transport because you need to, and you start to wonder whether you actually want to work in the city. But this is where the jobs are. This is where the hospitals are. This is where you have many schools. This is an issue of urban planning also, in a way, that is starting to emerge. All these elements that I have mentioned are probably new compared to 2010. These were not there. Airbnb is a novelty of the last 7 years. It was not there in 2010. And so these raise issues of what can we do at European level to address, and that's the second part.
Exactly.
I just wanted to then briefly mention that there are particular groups that are affected by all this. I mentioned in general the low-income groups and the middle class, but you see many young people struggling to find, this was mentioned. And when we talk about gender, single mothers are particularly affected because they are one of the most vulnerable groups now, or in the new poor. And so it's really important to also have this gender element and discussion around access to affordable housing.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much. I think a lot of elements of an all-European picture have been put on the table. And indeed, I think there has been an emphasis on this point that as compared to the previous crisis, there are probably more issues which are evenly spread across Europe, right? So there were big housing crises in a few countries, let's say 15 years ago, with the great financial crisis. But now with the inflation, migration, cost of living problems, Airbnb, and so on and so forth, so there's probably more even distribution, and we are all in the same boat, more or less, or at least more than before. So once we have this evolving situation, how do you see the necessities but also the capacities of the European policy to act and intervene? Is it more a regulatory issue from the financial side or other side? Is it more an investment question to help countries to top up their investment capacities? Is it more a sharing of the good examples, which, for example, Ursula von der Leyen started with the Bauhaus idea? If you want to comment on that, or another angle. So, which angle or which tool you would like to put forward if it comes to, let's say, a to-do list of the European Union for the next stage? Should we go into the same order?
Yeah, well, if you want, maybe Anna wants to start now. Or so we can react on you.
Yes, okay. So, of course, as you are aware, we are in a very delicate moment of the political cycle, because we are entering into the discussion of the new mandate of the Commission. And of course, there are a lot of discussions of what can we do and what can we not do. If the Commissioner would be here, he would say, this is not the case, but I'm going to quote him because he's a good source of inspiration. He would say, when there was COVID, no one would say health was EU competence, and yet we had to do something. So most discussions start by housing is not a EU competence, and therefore it's devolved to, or not devolved, but it's we apply the subsidiarity principle, and it should be the regions and so forth. The problem, the magnitude of the problem is such that it is considered a European problem, and so even if the regulatory space might be limited, because the treaty is what it is, and you know, there are elements there that we could investigate, but is still a narrow path. There are things that can be done at European level to support those that will be in the front line in delivering policies. At the regulatory level, let's put it this way, housing as a social policy is difficult to legislate upon. It's probably impossible. The treaty puts a lot of caveats explaining how social protection and social inclusion are in the hands of the member states. But of course, there is a single market. There is the provision of services, and as it has been mentioned, the market does not function to deliver the result that it should, and in many places, fortunately, housing is considered a service of general economic interest. And from that angle, we can have a discussion of whether the EU can be more or less lenient in what it comes to public investment. Now, those who have been looking at this carefully, they will say that the current rules are too stringent, because what we consider to be social housing in the context of state aid and services of general economic interest is limited to housing that is provided to vulnerable groups, where, as we just discussed, this is an issue that affects other parts of the population. So there may be an angle there to investigate. The second aspect relates to the short-term rentals. This commission has put forward a proposal that has been recently agreed on transparency of the market in relation to short-term rentals. Transparency is good by itself, but is it enough? So I think this is a legitimate question for the next mandate. When it comes to money, because laws are important, but money is also extremely important, there has been a lot of investment already channeled to housing, either through cohesion funds or the RRF, and of course with the Social Climate Fund that is still to be enacted in 2026. There are possibilities of using EU funds for renovation, but I think it's legitimate to say that housing as such has not been identified as a specific priority. And so this in itself might lead to thinking, what could we do in the next, in the discussions of the next MFF and in the design of the next programs, of how housing could be more visible if there is political will. And then I finalize with this last part of sharing experiences. I think this is where we can do a lot more, but there is also an issue of monitoring. As I mentioned, we are not really well equipped to dig into the situation and be able then to put political pressure. We have just a few indicators, and those indicators might not be politically they are not maybe significant to some politicians. And so our methods of giving pressure through the European semester and so forth might not be nourished enough with analytical elements that allow for this. So I leave it at here, and I will want to hear what else is that.
Thank you so much. I think it has been already a list of very important openings, but let's see how to continue.
Yeah, maybe two little remarks. One is that I love that you say that. I mean, this is more political than an academic discussion, but I would love your colleagues in DG Competition
yes
see that in the same way as you. And I've been discussing, of course, with them since many years now on how to revise the EU state aid rules with regard to the narrow target group definition on social housing. And we've done, I'm not doing this on my own, I'm doing this together with with colleagues who are in the affordable housing community, like Housing Europe, like the International Union of Tenants, and of course like many cities and regions who are hit by the housing crisis since long, and who see that there is a lack in investment, and who know that these EU state aid rules, I mean, we have collected the cases, are making investment close to impossible, and even worse, they are destroying elaborated and well-established systems of social housing provision. Yeah? They allowed institutional investors to attack the housing system in the Netherlands, the system in Sweden. Yeah, they succeeded there because they were small member countries. They tried with France, but they were too big, so they were like, you know, France said, like, we don't care. But in fact, the story behind all of that, of course, is this is a neoliberal concept. The market should deliver, and you should be able to find your way through the market as an adult person. And if there is a person in need, you will get some kind of, you know, little lump sum, aid, help, whatever. But that creates an impossible situation, and I think it's disgraceful. There is a mindset behind that says that social housing is some kind of charity, and you have to earn it, and you have to prove that you are worth it. And that's something where, coming from Vienna especially, where you get controlled only once when you enter into a contract with a municipal housing contract company, and that is when you sign the contract. This is the only moment where your income is controlled. And I know that in many other countries, when you are into the system, it's like you have to be grateful every day, and you have to prove, like, every 2 years or every 1 year that you're still in the position to get all of that aid, and you're, that's something where I really think this is the problem of the mindset behind this also is something that we should address, and we did it, of course. That's on the state aid. So we are clearly saying this has to change. There is no other way, and we have the evidence. And in the end, I will talk about a little bit of my to-do list for academia. So there, I'll come back to you on that. Where we need a little bit more research on, and you mentioned the indicators, of course. But in general, I think there is a recognition that there is a problem, and the question is, where are the solutions? And Sorka can talk much better on the funding and provision, but I would like to just make my second remark would be, who is really financing housing in the end? And there is a deeply also democratic, I would say, argument behind that, because of course there is money from the EU. EIB funding, EU cohesion policy can do a lot. A lot of housing providers go for the Council of Europe Bank. Now, I mean, the World Bank is coming into the system when we look at Ukraine, for instance. Yeah? So in the end, there is a lot of financiers out there, including the private sector, but most of the money is coming from people. And this is where I think that we should also build an argument for participatory approaches and people empowerment in the system. And that's why I'm deeply convinced that it's absolutely right in the treaties to say that housing is a competence of the member states, because they are coming to the mayor of Vienna if they have a housing problem, and not to Mrs. von der Leyen. Yeah? Who has nice ideas about the new European powers. I will not comment on it, but maybe later, or when we have the reception. But in fact, this is not. There is no money in this project, and it's. I think that in a way there is also a construction problem, because it has no gender dimension, of course. So beautiful cities are for women. No, didn't hear that. So anyway. There is a participatory approach when it comes to housing financing, and that means that we also have to include the people who live there, the tenants there. There is something where we need to go for co-creation and co-management even in the housing sector, and this comes back to what you said about the big renovation wave that we have to have in Europe. I mean, a lot of countries we have done. There is some progress now with the directive on the energy efficiency in buildings, with regard to the protection of tenants. Yeah, but this was a fight, and again, it was the tenants and the cities who were in that discussion a lot, because to pass on the renovation costs kind of automatically to the residents is, of course, something that will again lead to an exacerbation of the crisis, because people will not be able to live there anymore after the renovation. So if we want this whole transition to be working for the people and the planet, we must also look at the people. And this is why my pledge goes also for a change in the mindset on European level. Housing is not a charity; it's a human right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Sorka, what would you like to add?
Yes, some key points there. I think it's coming up to the elections. Just another sort of little anecdote I just saw yesterday in my own country, that the incumbents actually stand, when it comes to housing, so people who own their own house are actually keen on voting for the incumbents, whereas people who don't, or who are in precarious housing situations, are actually voting for the anti-establishment. And I think it just goes to show what a complex issue this is, and also the different histories in the different member states, how much onus is actually put on the value of private property, and so if we're looking at what's going to be a vote winner, it's actually much more complex than it would seem, because I think this is where EU has to try to overcome that and look at the societal interest here, because it's very often not going to come from national level, because politicians are going to go for vote winners, and very often that is not the general interest, the shared interest, the common interest. So if you, for instance, talk in certain constituencies in Europe about, we're all going to have rental homes, you would potentially have no chance of being elected. So I think it's a really complex political issue, and of course the EU is the Council, is the Parliament, who are elected. So this is where it's complex. So just also to outline how our advocacy works. So what actually the sector is made up of 43,000 local housing providers. So in Spain, they are public housing companies that are actually building for low-income ownership. A small amount just in Bilbao, Catalonia, Sevilla, so a small amount are actually building up a stock of rental. So they are public housing companies. It's only about 6% of the stock. Very different to that in Sweden, let's say it's 30% of the stock, also municipal housing companies, who are actually forced to make a profit, but the profit goes back to the city. In the Netherlands, they're housing associations, and it's 30% of the total stock, so they're private entities that are delivering homes on a non-for-profit basis, so they're charities. And that's, indeed 30% of the stock. Vienna is one of the highest proportions, so it's 60% of the stock when you bring together the municipal housing providers and the limited profit housing providers. That percentage would go down when we look at the southern states of Austria, also because there's a more higher proportion of, let's say, home ownership in rural areas, etc. So what our advocacy consists of is listening to those providers that are struggling to maintain houses, build houses with a mixture of private and public funding. And what we would do is scan European legislation, what is being proposed, how would that interact with their activities, how would it help them to build, or how will it hinder them to build. And that it comes, if we have a picture of all the DGs, that would come across DG Taxud, so it would be looking at low rates of VAT when it comes to provision of social housing, which is a possibility under EU legislation. It would look at energy efficiency, so new norms. Now with new legislation, the primary energy consumption of residential stock has to be reduced by 16% by 2030. So that's going to directly impact the housing providers, also their capacity to build new, because they have now the obligation to bring down the consumption of the existing stock, depending on how their member state transposes that directive. We would look also at public procurement legislation, so the capacity to procure in a socially sustainable or environmentally innovative way, when actually very often you're pushed to have the lowest price, and because of a lack of competence also very often at local level. So what we would be looking at is, okay, how is European legislation impacting on those local providers which are very diverse. There's also, I didn't mention cooperatives, so you have home ownership cooperatives which are predominant in Scandinavia. It's also a significant tenure in the north of Italy. You also have a growing actually interest in rental cooperatives, so that would have been typical in Switzerland, Germany, but it's actually being let's say now cross-border fertilization in Catalonia. They're taking up this Swiss and German model of rental cooperative. So it's a right of use cooperatives. So it's such a mixed picture of how the different ways are over 100 years or more that the different systems have developed, and I think it's a real rich something that Europe can really be really proud of. I was thinking, should we take out a World Heritage status or so protection status of those systems? Because I mean, we talk with organisations who have been active for over 100 years and are still, so in Germany, in France, even like in the Netherlands, in the UK. Now they're out, who have been active over 100 years and are still building. So I was thinking, should we have a UNESCO protection? Because the problem with it is that we've also seen systems that, with a few wrong legislation, can be undermined over 10 years and can be disappeared over 10 years. So the Swedish suffered a lot of harm because of the government's interpretation of state aid rules, where they removed all public aid from the municipal housing companies, forcing them to be in a situation of equivalent of a private company, so disincentivizing them to house vulnerable groups. So we've also seen, just in the time I've been there, systems really undermined. And I think what we really need at European level, I think it's what we're calling for actually in our manifesto, is a change in paradigm. So instead of sort of giving as much free rein as possible to the market, actually turning the logic around and saying, okay, how can we really expand the public, social, cooperative, community-led housing provision so that it actually reaches a critical mass? I don't know if any of you joined critical mass of cyclists, but to get that numbers up. So actually, yes, you have the right conditions, the right access to land, the right VAT rules, so that you can actually really expand that sector until the point that indeed it starts to have an impact on the rest of the market, and that studies show in Austria. So it's not easy for the EU because of the diversity of all those models, but I think if we can sort of turn this sort of logic of market and then clean up, which is a logic that actually doesn't correspond to a lot of how member states have developed over the last 100 years or more. If we can turn around that logic at EU level so that we have clear signals coming from Europe that yes, this is the way to go, I think it could really help. So we are really hoping that these messages land, because Commissioner Schmidt has been really very, very supportive on this, despite the limits of competence. But if this can land at the next Commission, we think that could be half the battle. So this change in paradigm, and work out, okay, how does that translate into all the different legislation that is impacting this limited profit public interest sector.
Thank you so much. I think there is an appetite to go interactive, but I would like to make a short round with the following question. I think all of you pointed to some inspirational examples. Of course, Vienna started, but there are many other smaller or greater examples as well, where we believe that something was addressed well, or some policy really worked out. And this might be either your favorite example of rent control, or a favorite example where the housing situation of a minority group in society was solved very well in Central Europe and the Balkans, for example. The question of the Roma minority is really serious. And when we developed some time ago a Roma integration strategy, that was also one of the 4 critical issues to provide decent housing. So there can be other examples. For example, when somebody became a champion in terms of the sustainability and reducing the energy intensity, of the housing, maybe on the gender dimension. So there are many angles which might have been addressed, at least partially, by somebody who is a pioneer. Housing First was a pioneering model when it came to addressing the problem of homelessness, for example. And in the social investment package, once upon a time, this was also presented as an inspiration. So I wonder if we could make this short round, put forward a couple of examples, one or two, which you think, apart from Vienna, would be also a good model. And then in the meantime, I can encourage everybody in the audience to prepare already a question to the panelists. Who would like to start?
On women.
Go ahead. Yeah, gender.
Two examples.
Yes.
I was, in my biography, I started my career with the city council responsible for housing and urban renewal. And then I worked for the city council responsible for women's rights. And so with these little elements, we did something which was, I loved really, which was we set up the Frauenwerkstatt. So it was building a municipal and cooperative housing complex in Vienna, which was designed explicitly along the needs and lives of women by female architects only. And that's already, a while ago, because I'm a little bit older now. So, but if you Google it, that was a little bit a funny discussion at that time, because the guys in the construction department of the city, and you're it's giving more rights to the female architects, and the Chamber of Architects was coming to us and saying, but that's not fair, and it's not a fair competition. So this was all wurscht, as we say in Vienna, completely egal. And in the end, it was like we had also the great Margarete Schütte-Lihotzky, who knows her? She was she invented the Frankfurter kitchen. So she was really the first one to design a flat also in a way that women who were working had a better life. Clearly, all of this will help men if they take their fair share of the whole business, which is not paid. But what really was interesting, that for instance, we in that case, it was normally when you enter a multi-apartment flat, you would have the place where you put the trolleys for the kids somewhere in the back, and it's very difficult to reach it. So what they did, where it was putting it very much into the front, easily accessible. The corridors were playgrounds. So we used more space for that, but we were strictly sticking to the general rules for housing construction and public promotion of housing. So all the programs, all the criteria were fulfilled. And what I'm proud about is that today in Vienna, when we do new urban development sites, we have the whole catalog of criteria, meanwhile, where we, for instance, have now technical norms even, to set out that, for instance, you need to have a playground that is accessible for all the kids, which has a social connection in a way, visibility, transparency, all of that, so that we are all on the safe side. We have also the width of pathways is regulated, so that people are not those who are, if normally it's women, but if men also do it, fine, they can profit of it. So the width it allows more people to move. You should not put too much urban infrastructure on the pathways, we have norms for that meanwhile. And we say that adding the gender equality dimension to all our urban planning is in fact something like the final quality assessment. Yeah, so that's something where I think we saw a development from one project to a whole set of regulations that makes the city better. Yeah, and the last example, and then I'm stopping. Because it was said single mothers. Yeah, we now we have a new municipal housing complex that is dedicated to single mothers, because we saw that it's clear that they need more assistance and they need more support. So there is more facilities and there's always. So this is now has been opened, I think a few weeks ago, and it's a nice thing. I hope that they find partners in a way, so that's not a problem. But there is a dedicated element now or program and project for single mothers in Vienna.
Impressive.
I want to move to Vienna.
Yes. Ich bin ein Wiener. Who said that?
Yeah.
I would name two as well, follow the trend. So one project actually, and I think it's something I would love to see more of also in my own city and neighborhood, and that's an intergenerational development by public housing promoter in Valencia called Las Americas, and I was lucky enough to be able to visit and just to witness the vibrancy. It was a mixture of men and women, but actually mostly sort of elderly women, but there was a 12% quota of young people also in, and they were making sure that this proportion of young people was really respected. So I was there about 10 years after it was actually developed, and just the enthusiasm, the vibrancy of the community. So I was there on a Friday, and there was a lady organising, the drinks, and there's a special drink they have in Catalonia just before an aperitif. So they were organising this. They also were organising computer classes, so they were able to Skype grandchildren. So very quality accommodation near services, near health services, near transport, options also with share accommodation where they could welcome their family members. So a really impressive development, but unfortunately I think now there is a plan to actually replicate one, but it hasn't really been replicated, even though they have won many prizes, housing development prizes all over, been recognized globally, but it hasn't really been multiplied. But I just spoke with the manager last week, and it's one of the only developments where they have 100% payment of rent. So it's it's a subsidized rent, so people are should be on below a certain income, and they should not have a second home. But 100% payment of rents, which in Valencia they told me was significant. And just linked to that, an excellent project I saw in Cork, a right-sizing project. So it's also linked in a way to what we have to do to deliver on the housing crisis, remaining within our carbon budget. So not only fiscal budget, but also our carbon budget. So it was a massive right-sizing project where people who were under-occupying their home could actually exchange it via the local authority for a smaller unit. Not necessarily for very elderly people, but people over, I'm not sure what the age limit is, I don't want to give bad information, but they could transfer to a smaller unit where, again, access to services, access to cities, and potentially also wheelchair access, potentially, if that would be used. So a right-sizing scheme, so we don't say downsizing, we say right-sizing, which I think ticks a lot of boxes and could be very useful in many cities. And I only said two, but the last one I wanted to mention, Eindhoven, Space S. So again, a social housing company working together with local authority also for the planning, completely co-created a small estate. So the individuals who are going to live there actually shared in the entire planning, even picking out the color of the bricks. They were camping there, not because they needed to camp, but even camping there to get a community, build a community. And now they co-manage that. So they co-manage. So a lot of the repairs are actually even handled locally. So there's much less complaints actually going to the housing managers. But what was very impressive is that one of the blocks was also dedicated to, they worked together with an association working with disability. So we met a lot of the tenants who were now able to move out from their parents, work independently, access transport because of this new home. And also a block of an association with people with autism. And one of the people we met, he had severe autism, but he was on the managing board of the block. So some of the inspiring ways I've seen in my job.
Carla?
Well, I don't have this first-hand example like the ladies have shared, but the Commission has just published what we call a toolkit of best practices, where you can actually have many examples of how the EU funds support housing. And maybe I pick one just for the sake of, which is a bit of a different dimension, because the ESF, the European Social Fund, has financed in Italy, in Palermo, Sicily, what we call the Social Housing Agency. So it is not about supporting the construction of houses, but it was about supporting multidisciplinary teams that would provide support to people in need of affordable housing, because very often the issue of access to housing comes together with other issues, and so this idea of supporting multidisciplinary teams with psychologists, mediators, language mediators, really was intended to have an approach that is not just about housing, but also the services that need to come around it. And of course, next to it, there was a guarantee fund to support the families who could not be or not able to pay the rent. So there was a financial incentive there. But I think is a complete different approach, issue from what has been exposed. But I think these are also very important projects where you create an environment that is supportive to the population, and that also requires some money.
Mm-hmm. Voilà. Thank you very much. I think we completed 3 rounds of the discussion. This should be now the start of the interactive part. So if you raise your hand or signal your interest in a different way, I will notice you. So we start with you, and then Dominique, and then I will try to collect a list.
Patrick Vesane, University of Aosta Valley, Italy. I have 2 very simple and short comments and 1 question. The comment is, first of all, if we think about housing policy as a strategy, we think that there is not a problem of policy tools or strategy, because all policy instruments are already there, and we know them. It's my impression. The problem is not really about strategy, because, for example, in Italy, in research, I have identified at least 20-25 different kinds of policy tools. We know them. The main problem is simple: money. Because, first of all, you have to build houses owned by public authorities or third sector organization. Secondly, you have to finance social housing or this kind of community social manager or agencies or guarantee funds. Or finally, you have to give incentives for private affordable rent. So you need money. That's the big problem. Secondly, Michaela, you said housing is not a charity, it's a human right. Indeed, I perfectly agree. But then, sorry for this, there is the real world. The real world said that I think you have to manage a queue of applicants. That's the problem. Queue of applicants for affordable housing. And this means manage a queue of applicants because you have not enough social housing opportunities. Queue applicant means manage conflicts, tension, and ethical dilemma. Mm-hmm. In Italy, social housing, sometimes there are some families that can inherit social houses. Mm-hmm. And then you have queue. So you can have people, it's not just a question of neoliberal mindset, it's a real problem because you have people living in social housing with a rate of 50% of available income in terms of expenses, and then you have people in the houses with a limited rate. So it's a big problem. I finish, for a question. Moving to the European level, what should be the space, the role for social economy, so third sector organization, in building a new strategy and as a kind of new institutional venue at the EU level to push for more investment in social housing. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Patrick. Dominique?
Dominic Afsharian from the University of Tübingen. Thank you, first of all, so much for your input. It's really interesting. I have a question that's probably relevant for the entire panel. There was recently a fun podcast series from The Guardian entitled Who Screwed Millennials? And the argument there essentially was
the title?
Who Screwed Millennials? Rather vulgar, provocative, but the argument I think is quite interesting that they raise. That is that if we look at affordable housing, all policies tend to be geared towards bringing housing prices down, which seems trivial at first. But then when you look at the intergenerational aspect of that, you have the generation of the baby boomers who in many countries were promised housing prices will always go up, hence invest in houses because that is your retirement. So you have a kind of a social dilemma between generations there, because if you achieve housing prices going down, then you might have a disaster in terms of pensions, that given that already, as it is, pension systems in many countries are already under heavy strain. So how can you resolve this? And not only concerning the social element of it, but also the political element. So how do you get the biggest generation of all time to vote for a policy that would undermine a promise made to them throughout their entire lives?
Thank you very much. Any other questions? Please.
Hello, I'm Margherita Manco and I work for the International Union of Tenants. So we represent the tenants. And in this panel, hearing all your contributions, we could hear about the necessity to involve people. So my question is, why are we not also involving people in this kind of debates, in this kind of discussions? Because the people have a strong part in designing the new housing policies, in contributing with their ideas and with their necessities. Because as Michaela was speaking with the example of Vienna, the houses and the collaborative housing and so on are designed according to the needs of the people. So the people should be more and more involved and be part in this kind of debates, and the tenants as well. So the representation of the tenants, for example. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Why don't you make a round of answers or reactions to these questions before going forward?
I think what Margareta now said, I mean, involving people and protecting tenants, it fits perfectly to the principle 19.2 of the principle of European Pillar of Social Rights. We have done a lot now on homelessness. We have the European Platform to Combat Homelessness, which is good. We have the toolkit now with regard to, you know, financing, helping and identifying financing solutions. But we lack a little bit this part of how do we protect tenants? Yeah, I think still the best protection of tenants and also the best way to empower them is to give them unlimited rental contracts, because that creates a level playing field with the homeowners. So that's a question of égalité. Huh? And of course, it's about rent control and rent regulation. Yeah, so that's, and what you could also envisage is why not support services like tenants unions? Why not create them where they are not existing? Yeah, we have a growing rental sector in many places, also even in the Eastern countries where they went into home ownership after the end of the communist system regime. They were given the flats at a very low price, but nothing was done to provide for maintenance and repair, all of that what you need in a multi-apartment housing block. And now these are literally, I mean, just the color holds them together, the painting. Yeah. So there is a big need, and they are again now going into rental a lot. So, but they don't have rental tenants protection schemes there. So building up on that part of the pillar would of course be something that I would like to see in the next Commission mandate, for instance. Yeah, that's one aspect. Maybe on the question of I just take that one on the question of the many people fighting for the little available social housing stock. I mean, this is a very deep political problem, of course. What we know is that, I mean, for instance, systems like Housing First, which is a very good example, yeah, how to make sure that people who don't have a home get a home, yeah, they work much better in places like Austria and where you have a big cooperative and municipal housing stock, because there, I mean, the waiting list in Vienna is maximum 2 years. But that's, I mean, in Brussels, they even go on the waiting list anymore because it's senseless. Yeah, this is so. And what happens there, and I think that's political. That's an explosive. Yeah, it's people fighting against each other who are the most vulnerable, So you have like the homeless, the handicapped, the young poor, the working mothers, the single mothers, the migrants, the refugees. This is really an explosive, I would say, dynamic that plays, I mean, sorry to say that it plays directly into the hands of the very right and extreme right wing. We must see that also. I would like to see the political scientists here working a little bit and elaborating on that topic, because this is the danger of what Sorkas described. Should be so proud of the model that we have in Europe, and we should make it flourish. But with this kind of competition in a limited market, this is why we are arguing to build a bigger share, to go for a broad diversity of affordable schemes, because that can range from a social agency, that can be like community land trust, that can be cooperative municipal, that can be affordable rental, affordable home ownership, but control it, and if you're sure to control a bigger share of the market, then you are also on the safe side with regard to crisis, and you are resilient, and your system becomes resilient. So go for a broader share and more diversity in the system, and that could also be an answer a little bit to what you said. The broader and the diversity is in your system. It's also good for the labor market. At the moment, we have companies who cannot find people working for them in Europe because they can't afford living there. I mean, this is Europe today. And that's, of course, a question of the economy now. So, yeah, that's basically my answers.
Yes. Further reactions?
Yes, building on what's been said, I think a good example around involving people is to Denmark. So Austria is not the only place where we can also have quite a good system. So it's they call it tenants democracy. So the tenants are directly involved in all of the decisions around the management of an estate, apart from who can move in, because they require some objectivity. But Denmark is also a good example. So the issue of finance was mentioned. So they have optimized the type of models that we need, where when there's finance, because actually you say finance is the only issue, but actually finance has been the root of the problem of where we find ourselves today. We've had a wall of money going into real estate in an extractive nature, extracting value, not only in housing. I mean, it's across the board. So algorithms that were driving finance into real estate and extracting any value from society. So money is not actually the only issue, and I think it's what type of money is put into housing, and what rates of return are expected, what is the conditionality, the social conditionality linked to that funding. I mean, we have a little bit of this narrative growing with the whole conversation. I don't know if you're following it around ESG, around CSRD, so conditionality linked to basically raising the reporting obligations for investors when it comes to social and environmental criteria. So this is a way to try to shift private finance in the right direction. From what I have seen till now, this is only going to be a box ticking and social washing exercise. So what we've seen in housing is that a push from private real estate developers to get that social stamp, but be able to step out after 10 years once the area has been up, has come up, where prices have gone up, and then they can step out. So we need the right type of finance with the right type of regulation and limitations on the ground, so that we can move away from the extractive nature. But definitely, you're right. It's all about having more investment in the sector, and there we link back to the EU rules around investment. So now we're going into a period. So we had a step out clause during COVID. Now public investment is going to be limited again, so member states are going to have to show how they bring down their public investment. It's going to hit the south of Europe and Central and Eastern Europe very hard. So there we are working with other social partners to try to make sure we have the budgetary space to make the investments that are needed. So yes, it's at the core, it's at the heart of the issue is indeed the more investment, the type of investment, and having the fiscal space. And then I would around the issue of indeed insider outsider and the generational issue. I think it's indeed we've built up over decades this model where housing is an investment, and indeed in countries with a weak pension system, it is also the source of pension. So what I think the argument, though, that you quoted is that, okay, we build more supply and eventually that will bring down the price. It's also a flawed one. And I think the answer there is, I think, again, to build the stock of different types of affordable or regulated housing to create this counterbalance. And also question this precedence of the private property over public interest. It links in with the issue of short-term rental. Okay, it was a great idea at the start. And at the base of it, it is a super idea. It gives people access to parts of the city they would never have. Uses better space. However, it turned into just an investment loophole and increased exploitation and just reducing the rental supply. So where do we draw the line between the right of what you're allowed to, how you're allowed to profit from your private property, and what is going against the common interest? And it's a really difficult. It's a really difficult question, but I think it's one we have to, if we want to go anywhere in housing, it's one we do have to think about.
Thank you very much. We're going to complete the circle, but I would like to ask David to take my seat in the moderation and Vanessa to take over the microphone for the continuation.
I will pick two subjects. I think this who screwed the millennials is really important, but I would like to bring a dimension, a cultural dimension, I think, because I don't think the reality is similar across all member states. If I just take my own country, to be a tenant in Portugal is still not looked very well. I mean, you fundamentally want to own your house, and that's somehow what you pass from parents to children and so forth. And having a house is a means of saving, but is also an heritage that you want to give to your children. I think that in a city like Vienna, being a tenant is just normal. I mean, so I just want to bring this element of diversity, because I'm not able to answer how should we fix this. I'm not able to give you a straight answer, but I would say that this goes very deep in certain countries to what is your values and how do you pass material good, material wealth to the next generation. And so there might be a conflict, because there is, as you have mentioned, but there is also in some families the idea that this will pass on. So also solidarity between generations. The other thing I wanted to refer is this issue of the instruments. We have all the instruments, and the issue is money. I mean, the numbers that are studied and projected in terms of investment need are gigantic. But the amount of money that has been put out there, public money, at least from the European perspective, after the COVID crisis, is gigantic. We have never had such a big budget. Italy has been one of the main recipients. And so we cannot say that the impact of this investment is completely seen. No, so there is more than just the quantity of money, as Sorcha was mentioning. I think there is an issue of the rules in which the way we spend the money are designed, and at a European level, it's clear. I mean, we even have countries now joining and telling to the Commission, look, we need different rules, because if you don't change the rules, we cannot invest. We cannot have more public investment in housing, because otherwise you are overstepping the issue, the ceilings of state aid and we are supposed to be in a competition. A competitive market, and that's why there are also internal discussions between different services, different perspectives. So I think there is an issue of quantity, but already with the money that is available, there could be more impact if there would be other types of rules. Yeah. That is one thing. The other thing is that in relation to this state aid, and a government can, for example, decide to support the construction of houses, but it could also support, for example, give income support to lower the price of the interest rate. I don't know if it's a complete different approach.
Guarantee.
Whom are you really supporting? Of course, eventually you support the person who needs to pay the rent, but where is your money going? The public money. If you're building a housing stock, is one thing. You're helping the supply. But if you are giving subsidies to be able to counteract the cost of interest rate, who is absorbing actually this? It's a complete different public approach, and so I think the instruments and the political choices matter, aside the quantity of money that would.
Thank you, Anna Carla. I take over as substitute moderation for the remaining little bit of time. I also work with Laszlo Andor at the Foundation for European Progressive Studies. I'm David Rinaldi. I'm Director of Studies and Policies there, and I also have the pleasure to teach here at the Institute of European Studies at the ULB, sometimes in this very room. It's very nice, and I see some familiar faces. I have a question of my own, but there is still time to ask yours, to fly yours. Amandine, you have the floor, and then we go to the right of Amandine.
Amandine Crespi from ULB. First of all, let me take the opportunity to thank our three speakers for participating in this panel. I think this is a great discussion. And also to thank FEPS for setting up the panel and for the moderation. A few years ago, we had a research project which was about how so-called fast-burning and slow-burning crises entail different policy responses, and Laszlo would have remembered because he was involved as well. So now COVID was mentioned and the way that it catalyzed the action of the EU. COVID obviously was a fast-burning crisis. In contrast, this housing issue has been a slow-burning crisis for quite some time now. And yeah, it taps into and is fed by the rampant, I would say, pauperization of European societies. But now the question is, in political terms, what can we do in terms of strategies to still have those slow-burning crises, such as the housing crisis, have an impact and also drive more action? Which type of, I would say, almost, scandalization strategies can we use to raise the awareness that something has to be done at whichever level, but including the European level? I think that's a very important question, because unless you can't mobilize both the public, the voters, those that are out there for votes, not much will happen, unfortunately, as we've seen so far. My second question is about a topic that is very dear to my heart. It was one of my very first research darlings when I started years ago as the services of economic or services of general interest in general. Back in 2006, 2007, the Socialists and Democrats, together with the ETUC, launched a campaign for a framework directive on services of general interest. That went nowhere, unfortunately, but the purpose would have been to ensure more accessibility, more affordability, and to shelter the public services from competition policy, like roughly speaking. This went nowhere. But still, services of general interest are still here. is it something that any kind of way, and that goes beyond housing, obviously, we could reboot now, some kind of mobilization about this? Would this make sense in any way? Could this be useful for housing, or is this not the right route, and would something else be more, let's say, efficient?
Thanks for the question, because I already feel that we have different diverging visions in the panel, so that's very good.
Yeah, thank you, Paolo Graziano, University of Padova. A very brief question regarding Airbnb and their beification. I partially live in Venice, and clearly when we're talking about social housing in Venice, you have to also consider the fact that, of course, Venice is a bit special, but if you look at the literature, you have a number of cities, also not necessarily historically relevant cities that are becoming increasingly covered by the phenomenon. And this, in my view, I'm not a specialist, so I'm asking you, I would like to know if there are effects that you have registered, not only in Vienna but also elsewhere, and if regulation, I know in Vienna a more stringent regulation has been put forward recently or is about to be adopted. So how do you see the issue, and what could be the way out in order to avoid a negative impact of Airbnbification on social housing and affordable housing, more broadly speaking? Thank you.
Do we have other questions? Right. Anna Carla, I would probably go to you for the first response, because I've heard Commissioner Schmidt speaking a couple of times in favor of a European regulation on Airbnb, for instance, but also perhaps on the services of general interest. Maybe some points.
Okay, maybe on the political momentum. I think that housing has been used already politically in certain national elections. We take the case of the Netherlands, but also in my own country, and it has been used to point, particularly to migrants. This is the scapegoat. This is the group of the population that is the cause of all our problems, including housing. So I do think that it is an issue that touches people quite considerably, because I don't know if you have been in Lisbon recently, but in the evening you have tents in the main avenues of the city. So it is not something theoretical. It is about where people live, no? So it touches people. So I think you can have a political debate around it. But this is my personal view. I do think that the far right was faster in grabbing this sentiment and as grabbed the narrative in a way. And now as we move to the EU elections, I think there is a sentiment that there must be a positive and a progressive narrative around this, and I think you will agree that Commissioner Schmidt is trying to convey this message, but we cannot deny that in some countries this has been grabbed by the far right, and so I fear that what will happen in the elections, the European elections, is, as all the surveys shows, an increase of the far right and more populist movements in the parliament. So bringing projects like the social services of general economic interest will become more difficult. But even within the College of Commissioners, which are not is not composed, is not a reflection of the EU elections. It's a reflection of the color of the governments. And if you just look what is happening now, how the governments are formed across the EU, you will see that in the College of Commissioners you will have a different balance of political forces. Now you will say it's more or less spread, okay, with the majority of the EPP commissioners, but still different forces and democratic forces. As we go forward, we might have commissioners in college that are not necessarily pro-Europe. If the government send to Brussels people that reflect their values, and so I do think that there are some issues like this issue of the social services of general interest that will be extremely difficult to bring home. Does it mean we should not do the work? No, on the contrary, I do think it's necessary to bring more attention to this. It has value to have a discussion around this, particularly in a society where we are saying, well, basically we need to consume less. Need to have more collective goods if we want to decrease our gas emissions, if we want to be able to live in the planet. We need to, in a way, to find other ways of having the same access to goods and services. So to me, that conversation needs to go be more accentuated and underlined. Will it be an easy conversation and a successful one? That I think it will be it will be difficult. I think the political context is very difficult. That is my. Having said that, the vote is an instrument for people to use, and so every mechanism to raise awareness is obviously welcome. I cannot say, should we scandalize people as you've asked? I don't have now the formula how to do this, but certainly I think that if the issue is raised, people will listen because it touches their lives. It's not something theoretical.
Thank you.
Okay. It's difficult to add on Anna Carla now, but with regard, you mentioned housing is like the slow burning crisis. I'm a very pragmatic person, and I would say that if we know that there is such a problem across Europe, we need to establish something to monitor and develop policy on European level. And to do this continuously and to give it stability and to introduce it into the systematic of the European Union, I would say, governance. Yeah. So what my mayor did just a few weeks ago, he invited the major European stakeholder organizations to not a summit, but to a dialogue about what should be done with regard to housing. And so we had, of course, the presidents of Housing Europe and the International Union of Tenants, but also of Eurocities, and the Committee of the Regions were there, the president of the Economic and Social Committee, the vice president of the Parliament, and your boss was, of course, connected with us online. So we had like this rich, I would say, mix of people who have been thinking about the topic since quite a while, and they propose now, and it was not a big declaration, yeah? You can find that on, it's an open letter to the Commission President, to the Parliament President, to the Member States. Please establish a sound governance system on European level to look into the housing topic on a continuous basis and using all the evidence that is out there and create the evidence if you don't have it. I mean, you mentioned that we have only used a few indicators. I totally agree with you. We don't have a full picture, especially of what's going on subnational level. The housing price index that we use in the European semester, for instance, that's totally awkward. It doesn't account for the whole system in many cases. Yeah. So what does it say if it's not a complete measurement? So we need to have a governance on European level, and that would be something that we would like to see in the next European Commission mandate, new Parliament mandate, but of course also on Member State level. Clearly, from the perspective of my mayor and many cities, the cities must be on board in such an exercise because they are the ones who are most at the front line of the housing crisis. And that should then go into looking into financialization, into Airbnbs, into money laundering in the sector, which is a huge problem. And in the end, we will have to discuss, I mean, what is behind the crisis? There is a deep distributional, I would say, problem. Yeah, it's about distributional justice in the end, because we have seen. I mean, people are burdened by housing costs because the housing costs were rising that way. But what happened to the salaries? Yeah. So that's all, and that's why also when it comes to retirement, I fully understand everybody who thinks that his home, which his father and mother have been building with their whatever, they give them security. If there is a system in place where the pension is not guaranteed by the state, then I fully understand that you have to go for that option, of course. Yeah? And this is what happens. We have social security systems that do not deliver, and that is, of course, creating that problem. And then we have the extraction of money out of the... I mean, public money. They are stealing the money of the taxpayers in many cases. You cannot tell it differently, and this is the truth. So going for tax justice and distributional justice is part of the solution to the housing crisis. Yeah. So that's something where I would be very clear. I would not open the Pandora box on SGI framework. We did that. I was in that discussion, Boltenstein and everybody, and Almunia and all our friends. No, I wouldn't open that box again. I think that what we have in place is already a very clear manifestation of I would say protecting the big players in the sector. Yeah, and I mean, opening this in a kind of a framework. Yeah, we would. I mean, I wouldn't recommend this now. And I agree with Anna Carla that there is at the moment, I think, no political momentum also for that.
Yeah. Yes, I think that what has also often struck me is indeed this comparison with COVID, and we've heard Commissioner Schmidt a number of times. Okay. Policies were accelerated in COVID, and I think what was really the game changer of COVID is that every evening we were looking at the data on the news. We were seeing the impact that was having on people. So even if we weren't directly impacted, we were seeing those results clearly reported. And I think, yes, it's a very different scenario. It's not potentially immediate life and death situation, but I think it is definitely about data. Clearly showing that indeed, so transparency about who is investing in properties, who is gaining, who is profiting from those properties. Also, who is your landlord? So very, very often we don't even know who our landlord is. Yeah. So it's about shining a light on the sector, having more data on who is running and owning, who are the interests in the sector, but also the prices. So the prices in your area. So very often we only have private real estate companies who are running websites where's the only source of comparison of prices. We need more public data on the price of rentals, which as Germany use it with the Mietspiegel. So you have a 10-year reference point, and the rent cannot go above that 10-year reference Mietspiegel. So more transparency, more data, and data indeed of how this is impacting. So, okay, the migration issue is one that's polarizing. But what about a teachers index? So in your local schools, why are they short of teachers? So directly linked to the affordability crisis. So I think more and more data, trying to keep away from the ideology. We see it in many countries, particularly my own, but also in Southern Europe and also in the UK. So it's about, are we a home ownership country? Are we a rental country? Keep away from ideology and stress the need to give people a choice. So at the moment, people don't have a choice to access home ownership. They only have the choice to access exploitative rental conditions in many cases. So the policies have to be about giving people a choice of whether they want to actually save to go into home ownership or whether they want to enjoy a stable rental contract. So it's about that choice. And then the bigger picture is trying to, and indeed the new European Bauhaus, we didn't talk about it, but actually at the base of it, I don't know if any of you have followed it, but it was a big project which talked about, launched by Ursula von der Leyen actually, our built environment being together, beautiful and sustainable. And okay, we've mentioned that there hasn't come with a big funding package. It's also not linked to any strict regulations. However, the spirit of this, and we've used it quite a lot, is this together. And I think to emphasize the fact that no, housing should not be left only to the individual, but it's a societal issue that we have to look at together. And this is what has happened over the decades from the Margaret Thatcher era. When she was running for election, actually one of her strategies was, for instance, never to be seen on a train, because trains were collective, because her ambition was to go for individual society, because of course it's good for markets. And that was a clever strategy to achieve the aims that she eventually did achieve, and that big part of that was privatization of a social rental stock, so the right to buy. So to try to find also strategic, clever ideas to show the opposite. And just today I was reading Cooperative Co-housing New Initiative in the Netherlands. So shining a light on those type of initiatives, rather than keeping the market interest focus on only individualism. But I think it's a really complex picture. There's no perfect solution, but plenty of good ideas to influence.
We give the floor to Anna Carla to respond on short-term rentals, and then I will do it something unexpected. I will ask a question to you. So get ready.
Yes, I realize we have not reacted to your question. So we have been having some tension, because some cities and some countries have tried to control the issue of short-term rentals by some rules. And the Commission, some parts of the Commission have been saying, oh, these rules are against our services directive, because we have a single market where provision of services needs to be, stimulated and so forth. So there is a sort of a tension there. But I would argue that this is an area where, of course, we can legislate. It's a matter of what is the political objective and how do you construct this instrument. Of course, the only when we are preparing for a new commission, there is something called the political guidelines, which is the political mandate that is put forward by the future president, and that this person goes to parliament and is going to present the political guidelines, and then the parliament decides we like it or not, and then we vote for him or her. This time around, when Ursula von der Leyen went to parliament, she had to negotiate some of these guidelines in order to have some votes. And this is how the mandate of this commission was shaped by that negotiation. So, having been several mandates of the commission, there is one thing that is normally sure, is what is in the political guidelines. All the services know this needs to be delivered. Everything else is then a fight, sometimes a very intense negotiation inside, and sometimes things never see the light of the day. But if it's in the political guidelines, that's the mandate. So this is the moment, in fact. It's in this negotiation between the two institutions when the parliamentarians are going to cast their vote whether the president wants, should take the mandate or not, that they can ask for certain things. And of course, in this area, this is possibly one of the things that could emerge. Now, it's a matter of whether this is high in the political objectives of the different political groups, and how much effort, political capital, it would require to have a balance. So it's all about this. There is nothing else.
Thank you, Anna Carla, for this eye to reality. I think we have just regulated platform work with the directive. Also, thanks to Schmidt. So, who knows that we can also regulate other type of online, platforms. Indeed, this is the moment, and that is why actually my question to you all. It's a moment exactly because we have the election, we have a new commission, we have a new mandate. It's not exactly the moment to change things at the margin, but we have the chance to make a leap. Even if Europe doesn't have a lot of competences on housing, it is the moment in which we can push in these circumstances. The Progressive Family, I think the Greens, the Left, they are all relatively united in prioritizing housing. So there is a relatively large spectrum, at least on the center and center-left, that will push in this direction. But we have to raise it maybe a little bit institutionally. So at the moment, I don't know. I suppose you're all familiar that the Commission President will issue letters to the different commissioners. Would you be in favor of having housing clearly spelled out to one commissioner as one of the objective of his or her mandate? If you are in favor, please raise your hand. So as a clear mandate from the Commission President, dear Commissioner XY, you have to do something for housing, for the housing crisis in Europe. Huh? That we don't know. Yeah, it's difficult to do something that bad on housing. But, so you would not look at it favorably.
Of course.
Okay, you were not that enthusiastic in raising your hand.
It's a representative crowd, I think.
Oh, but, to have it as a priority. But then the next question is even more. Would you be in favor of having a commissioner on quality of living and housing? Mm-hmm. The title of the commissioner.
Yeah, very good.
A little fewer, but still a critical mass. Still a critical mass. And this another question that maybe to conclude literally 1 minute each to our speakers, but we also ask you to maybe to raise your hand to signal interest or not. There will be, I think, the need for the new commission to be visible with some big actions liked by the citizens. This idea like the Next Generation EU or other stuff that can be distinctively recognizable as a cool commission initiative in a sense. So it's a moment in which you can go big, but at the same time you have limited powers. If we observe some of the cool things that actually your cabinet have done, among other stuff, but has done also on energy, is this idea of the Commission in a new way in which the governance work, of asking member states to devise a plan on a specific topic, on renewables, Repower EU, on child policy, the EU child guarantee. So basically telling to member states, these are some guidelines of what we would like to see. General guidelines. You have 9 months to devise a national plan on housing, a European initiative for national plans. And would that help if the guidelines are decent? Would that be feasible? 1 minute each to discuss feasibility and desirability for you, but instinctively, would you go for something in this direction or not? Commission forcing member states to think about housing and plan, maybe besides helping cities and regions basically at the member state level. You're timid, so we don't have a majority, not even here, which is problematic. But let's listen. If an arrangement from the EU to member states could be a possible or desirable thing, and in case, how?
So actually this idea of 9 months to put a plan together, I think it's a really good one, because I think now, so they stopped meeting for about 14 years. We don't know exactly why. The housing ministers responsible for housing in EU stopped meeting for over a decade.
2013 in Brussels they met.
Yeah, so and they've started up their meetings again now, and they all come together. Usually, if the presidency, let's see what happens under the Hungarian presidency. The Swedish didn't have one, but the French kicked it off, and Spanish. The Belgians were very strong, and the Spanish had the ministerial meeting. And I think there's a lot of frustration because they've come together, they sit around the table, and they all have really similar challenges, of all of the types of problems that we talked about today. A lot of them don't quite know what to do because there's also been a de-skilling of the public sector when it comes to housing, because they've lost a lot of the competencies and the tools because it wasn't, let's say, a core issue. So I think that could be a really useful exercise, actually, saying, okay, do a plan. So obviously that you'll have some ringing up each other. What the hell am I going to write here? You know, so you're going to have a natural, cross fertilization from the countries that have indicators that show they've been doing quite well. So I think it could be a nice one. And then the exercise would be after we see those plans. Okay, where can the EU actually add value here? So with in line with whatever College of Commissioners we have or whatever Parliament we have, so what policies, what from EU level, where could we actually look at the common points and see where we could move things forward. So yeah, I think it's a nice idea.
Thanks for the rather positive feedback.
Yeah, well, I tell you, I mean, Austria did not even deliver the climate plan, because the government is fighting each other. The Greens want it, the Conservatives don't. So, I mean, okay, fine. Plans are fine, but I would rather go for what Sorka said. Go for housing ministerial meetings, but also they cannot happen without us, the cities. They cannot happen without the social and affordable housing community, including the tenants and the housing providers, and they should not happen without, I would say, the evidence-based expertise that we can collect from academia. Because what we need to go is what happens with housing affordability in connection with the labor market, in connection with the overall economic development. What happens with the measurements? I mentioned housing price index. You mentioned the housing cost overburden rate. So is this appropriate? Talk about that. And then understand the situation and monitor it, and from that collectively develop policy recommendations. And that can then include things like, do we need something like a European housing cooperative to help those countries where they do, for instance, in their national system, they don't foresee such schemes? Do we need an exchange program, or the toolkit is a good start for that? That you now presented. Do we need to develop something like with EIB? I wouldn't go without EIB on that. Revolving funds. Keep the money in the system and create, and we would like to have people from the economic field here, to go for such systems and discuss this together and develop this together and embed it into a bold governance system on European level. That would be my approach.
Thank you, Michaela. Anna Carla, can we replicate the system of the child guarantee for housing?
Yes, we can. So you ask, is it possible? Yes, it's possible. I mean, every time the Commission makes a proposal on a recommendation, a Council recommendation, there's a plan attached. So the child guarantee is one. There is on long-term care. There is on minimum income. There is. Yeah. So it's possible. Yes. Is it desirable? Possibly. We have heard that some would be in favor. Is it impactful? That's where I would start to be a bit more cynical, because we have many of these reporting obligations that lead to nothing. And so I think Michaela just pointed to the right thing. If there is no political will, if there is no political engagement, these reports will just become obligations, bureaucratic obligations. And then they will not trigger the conversation that I think you hope to have with those reports. So I think if there is a momentum, a political momentum, because ministers are engaged, because they want to do something, then it's a natural step to offer this platform. But to oblige countries to do a plan where there is no conversation yet, it's just going to be it's just a revolving boomerang, because we have now this whole policy, this whole agenda of how we need to reduce reporting obligations at the level of companies and the level of the member states. So it's going to be so easy for the Council, for the member states to say to the Commission, but we cannot report on this. I mean, how much more reporting do you need? So you need actually the political impulse that a minister says, no, I want to do this, and therefore you need a bit of a coalition of the willing in Council that is ready to engage, and then the others will have to follow. So voila, I think the question needs a third adjective.
So the conclusion is that we need to go back to Amandine's point on how we get the crowd engaged, yes, so that we get the political will. I think in that we are all a little bit responsible on somehow galvanizing support, galvanizing connections, bringing up knowledge, sharing ideas. Because it's through a community of people that care about the common future and about the European Union as well, and social outcomes, that we can get this place a little bit more livable. Yeah. So continue doing the great work that you are doing, engage as much as possible. Stay connected also with us, with FEPS, the Foundation for European Progressive Studies. We will keep on working on this topic and other matters that pertains to the future of our social union. A big thanks indeed to the Institute of European Studies and the ULB, Amandine in particular, but all the others as well, to the two departments of Warwick University and the VUB. But please help me in a big round of applause for our three speakers. Sorcha Edwards from Housing Europe, Michaela Kauer from the City of Vienna office here in Brussels, and Ana Carla Pereira from the cabinet of Commissioner Schmidt. Thanks a lot for everybody, and we gather for a little drink here in front so we can hopefully mingle and continue discussion.
Good, thank you.